So, welcome everyone. On behalf of the NIA Biomarker Network, welcome to our webinar on measuring hearing and audiology in cohort studies. We are honored today to have three speakers with us who have the benefit of actually using some of the tools that are available in the field. So today we have Nick Reed, Allison Aiello, and Janet Choi. We will have time for questions at the end of each session. Zainab, if you can move to the agenda. And then also some time at the end for questions and discussion. Next slide. The way questions are going to work is, please keep yourselves muted during the presentations. When we open it up for questions, hold those until the end of the presentation, and we'll do it both live and via chat. So we have someone monitoring the chat for us. But if you also want to, feel free to raise your Zoom hand, and we'll take some live if we have those as well. So we're going to try doing it both ways. So without further ado, Nick Reed is up first. So we'll stop sharing our slides, and Nick, if you want to share yours. Great, take it away.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's a fun thing to share insights on since I've been doing this for a long time, it feels like. So I'm Nick Reed. I am faculty at NYU. Sorry, I'm just adjusting something on my screen. I'm faculty at NYU, and I still maintain an adjunct appointment at Johns Hopkins, where I was for 12 years prior to NYU. I'm going to give you a high level 10,000 foot view of sort of where I'm coming from with this work. I have a clinical doctorate in audiology. Audiologists are, it's a doctorate in measuring hearing. And I know that most people associate audiologists with hearing care and all the rehab side, but the truth is that's actually more recent. For 3, 4 decades, depending on where you were in Canada or the United States or Europe, audiologists were literally limited to just the diagnostic side of hearing care, whereas hearing instrument specialists actually delivered hearing aids. It wasn't until the 70s and 80s when the fields finally started to merge, and there are still areas of the world like Quebec where an audiologist is a diagnostician and hearing instrument specialists actually deliver the care. So the degree is very much overkill almost in measuring. And then my research doctorate is epidemiology, and more specifically, narrowly into clinical trials tracks from Johns Hopkins University. And so I sort of have, just by happenstance, merged these two areas. And something like a decade ago, 12 years ago, I joined Franklin's lab as a postdoc. And then a few years into that, around a decade ago, I was asked to start incorporating hearing measures into a lot of really large studies, including taking over for the one large study he had done it on. And so at this point, it's something like 15 studies. I think it's actually 16. I was trying to get the exact math. And we recently passed 100,000 audiograms in epidemiologic trials now, if you add them all up, including those who we've measured twice. But they are vastly different, right? The atherosclerosis risk and community study, clinic-based, population studies in 4 U.S. cities, longitudinal study aging of India, 17 sites, the dementia of assessment at 17 sites has a combination of there's clinic mostly for us, for the audiology side, but there are field visits. And National Health Aging Trends is the other extreme, home-based technicians traveling 48 states, 48 continental United States. They don't visit Hawaii or Alaska or territories right now. And then we have clinical trials like the Achieve trial, where we need these massively comprehensive assessments, as well as things like the Baltimore Longitudinal Study on Aging, which is a single site where people fly in and come to, or Lebanese Study of Aging with, I think, 5 sites in Lebanon, to what you'll hear about later, where we've advised and provided our protocols to Ad Health, or Bronx Longitudinal Study of Aging, again, like a clinic base. So we've done it in really tight areas and really wide areas. We've just been all over, it feels like. And much to my dismay, no epidemiologist has ever just agreed to use the protocols exactly the same, which I actually think is the real theme here. you're going to hear me sort of say, you're going to hear things like HearX and Shoebox and, audiometer, Equinox or GSI, all these things. The truth is they're all getting the same thing. In the end, it's the pure tone audiometry that you're looking for versus there's screeners and self-report that I'll talk about and speech measures and what those really are from a different standpoint. We get really, really wrapped up as when shoe leather epidemiology meets ivory tower epidemiology of the vocabulary we use causing a lot of confusion, I think, actually. So, hearing basics. Please, I'm not trying, hopefully, this doesn't insult anyone, but I like to start here because I actually think it's important that we just sort of remember what it is we're measuring or looking for usually. This is the ear. Again, super basic. Outer, middle, inner ear. Sound goes through that outer part. It funnels in. There's those three small, small bones in your body, the ossicles, they fit on a dime. They pump back and forth, and then they get into the cochlea. We're not going to look in the cochlea, but the cochlea is where we turn sound from mechanical energy. Well, it actually started as acoustic energy, then it becomes mechanical in the middle ear, then in the inner ear, it is turned into electronic energy and sent, to the brain as a neural signal. Once it gets to the brain, it's processed at several spots. A pure tone signal really only needs to go into the brainstem right around the superior olivary nucleus and medial geniculate body, and then we know we've recognized something. Things will go up, though, to the temporal lobe. They'll shoot across. They will eventually get to the prefrontal lobe. If you are thinking about measures of hearing, when most of us think of hearing, we think of speech. And the truth is, speech, in most cases, is a cognitive construct, actually. If you take a speech measure and you look at pure tone audiometry as one part of it, and then as a predictor of it, for example, so how much hearing loss do they actually have, and then various cognitive measures, you will find that the cognitive measures, depending on access to speech, at a certain point, if they literally can't hear the speech, that's different. But as long as they can hear the speech processing is mostly a cognitive construct. And even when they only get parts of it, they're sort of still usually getting a lot of cognitive contribution. We have many measures then. We have literal objective measures of peripheral cochlear function, like otoacoustic emissions, auditory brainstem response. We could do these in your sleep. We have pure tone audiometry, which is behavioral. We call it objective, but technically it's not. You choose to respond. The thing is, though, is that nobody doesn't choose to respond unless they're malingering on purpose. And it is repeatable in children, as well as older adults with dementia. It does not require much cognitive load. I actually, in the clinic, I know I study older adults and all the work you might be familiar with me on, but in the clinic, I'm only a pediatric audiologist. It is how I was trained. If you'd like to know the long story of how I got into the work, it is because one day somebody came into the clinic and said, we took a contract with a nursing home and they have a lot of patients with dementia. Since you do kids, do you want to test them? Which says a lot about our healthcare system, but we can do both really reliably. But as you go up and you start doing things like words presented in quiet, or like a task where speech with background noise is presented, or something subjective like how do you hear, you are moving towards cognitive and central functioning. So getting into the measures themselves, the one you hear about mostly is pure tone audiometry. That's this one, right? It is someone presenting a tone. It's what you did in elementary school. You raise your hand. They're seated in a sound booth or a quiet room, and you're capturing that. You're aiming to find a threshold usually, and you're capturing this very peripheral response to a signal. It requires almost no cognitive processing at all. The pure tone, once it hits your brainstem, you've already recognized it, right? It's a very automatic thing. And there's a lot of work. If anyone's interested, I'm happy to send the papers. I didn't want to belabor the point and review them, but a lot of work on repeatability now in adults with dementia because that became a hot subject when nobody had actually shown the work before. It doesn't require any decoding whatsoever. You can do it in different ways. You can test air conduction, which is when you put the headphone on the outside, right? That's what the gentleman in the Army fatigues has on. Or you can bypass that middle ear space we talked about earlier. You can actually put an oscillator directly on the big bone right behind your ear, and you can basically send a vibratory signal straight to the ear. And in the clinic, we do both. But the truth is, in epidemiology studies, you rarely would need both. I'll talk more on that later. What you usually see presented is this, the audiogram, right? As we're going across the x-axis, we're going from low to high pitch or frequency. And as we're going up and down, we're going from a soft to a loud signal. Generally, we test octaves from 250 to 8,000 hertz. You don't need all of them in an epi study. It really does depend on the question. You can go to ultra high frequencies and go way out there. Humans can technically hear between 20 and 20,000 hertz. It's just that we don't hear the same across the frequencies. And what you're looking at here has actually been not only is decibels a logarithmic scale that is not absolute, and the change in absolute energy at higher levels is actually, twofold relative to it is at lower levels. It's also equated across frequencies here. So you're actually looking at this scale that is very different than what you might actually see in real world sound measures. And this creates a lot of issues in unfortunately epi studies sometimes because some of the screeners will present in dBSPL and people will report them as if they're dBHL. That doesn't happen with pure tone audiometry threshold seeking. That's always converted to that, but that does happen in other tools. So most hearing loss actually cuts sort of across the middle here. So if you were to imagine there's that gray area that's normal, most age-related hearing loss kind of will be in the normal range at 250, 500, and then slowly drop off. And what you'll end up with is a phenomenon, to give you guys an idea, that is not volume-based, but clarity-based. And what I mean by that is you're cutting the sounds of speech in half. And so if I were to say the sentence to you, go to the pharmacy before you get to your house, if you were leaving the hospital, you might hear go ooh arma e before you get to your ooh, right? It became somewhat incomprehensible, but it was not a volume issue because you still got the vowels, which were low frequency energy that you still had access to. And that is why we test across multiple frequencies, because if you just test in a few that where hearing loss is more common, you will sort of characterize potentially the way you're saying how someone might function with their hearing loss based off that speech recognition. We usually turn it into a pure tone average. 500, 1,000, 2,000, and 4,000 hertz are the most important frequencies for hearing speech. It encapsulates, I think, 96% of speech energy. That does change a little bit between child versus adult speakers, female versus male speakers, depending on the pitch of your voice. It does give you this nice continuous scalar value, though, generally 0 to 100 hertz, and it can be categorized. I'm showing you the pre-World Health Organization categories from 2023. They changed them in 2023. Normal became 20. I take issue with that as an epidemiologist because it wasn't well justified. And overnight, we went from having 40 to 83 million Americans with hearing loss without very strong justification. So I'm not a fan of sort of just randomly changing things. So many studies still use this scale, but I will say it has changed. There are self-report measures. Measuring self-report is a very different thing than measuring, pure tone, quote unquote, near objective audiometry. Now you're measuring someone's perception of their hearing loss or a functional aspect of hearing loss, possibly with a hearing aid if applicable, right? Depending on the type of question. For example, in NHATS, we have 3 questions, and they're about difficulty in quiet, in a noisy restaurant setting, and on the phone. And during COVID, believe it or not, you actually see the cycle that happens during COVID. Suddenly, a large percentage of hearing loss cases drop off, and we lost something like 20% of hearing loss cases, which is physiologically impossible. You can't improve your hearing without some sort of aid, right? It wouldn't work. And even with hearing aids don't do pure tones very well, so you can't test aided. If anyone was wondering, what happened was basically people stopped going to restaurants, and the question about hearing in a noisy, crowded restaurant, people stopped answering as positive because they weren't doing it anymore. And so these are highly contextual. They really matter in your life. They also matter even what's anchoring them beforehand with survey bias. And for a perception measure, I'll show some of the data in a second. The way we respond to yes or no, do you have hearing loss, or ranking your hearing on a scale changes by age. And a lot of that is just normalizing to your age group. Right? So if everyone your age has hearing loss, and once we get over the age of 70 in the United States, 2/3 of adults have hearing loss. Once we get over the age of 85, almost 100%, 95% technically, but nearly 100, have hearing loss. So if everybody has it, you may not respond the same. So these do have some reliability issues. They really become contextual, and other variables can affect the response. Your cognitive status could affect self-report. And if the question of interest that most people are always approaching us about is, I want to do the cognitive part, if you're using self-report, cognition is part of the exposure in that pathway. It's not the same as the peripheral, right? There are questionnaires that get a little bit deeper. Does a hearing problem cause you to feel frustrated when talking to members of your family? I want to point out a lot of people use these questionnaires like the hearing handicap inventory for the elderly to decide if someone has hearing loss or not, and that is not what they were designed for at all. They don't really, they're not sensitive to capturing hearing loss. They're more sensitive to hearing-related quality of life. We don't really have a strong questionnaire that's truly sensitive to hearing loss in the full population. If you also look at self-report versus, the pure tone audiometry, our criterion standard here, it changes by age, sex, race and ethnicity, education level, and even where the hearing loss is. So we see studies that you really notice low frequency hearing loss. So once you start losing the 200 and 500 hertz, where a lot of the vowels are in speech, you really notice it. Whereas it's kind of hard to notice consonants. And for most of us on this call, we probably have listened to or fiddled with a radio in the car. My kids have no idea what the radio is. They just know what Spotify is. But you may have done this before. If you mess with the bass versus the treble, you will notice the bass. You will notice bass. If you mess with the treble, you actually usually have no idea, right? It's really hard to hear that clarity, those little high frequency parts. For those of you who are musicians, I know you're dying inside at me saying that, but the truth is, for the majority of us, we don't notice it. The psychoacoustics of it are different. But what most people need is that high frequency. We also change, as I said, by many other factors. In fact, if you were to play it out and do some predictive modeling based off of NHANES data in the United States, the most accurate reporters of their hearing level are Black women ages 60 and younger. The most inaccurate reporters, as you might imagine, are Caucasian males 80 and older. Caucasian males, and specifically as they get older too, are very likely to underreport their actual hearing levels. Oh, sorry, I didn't move the slide forward. Versus Black females, especially those with college education, are very likely to actually overreport their hearing loss and overestimate it slightly. The other measured category that we have is speech. So speech measures are something like a word or a sentence in quiet, or words or sentences in noise. They can be presented at really soft levels. They could be presented at very audible levels. If they are presented at very audible levels, or what some people might call super threshold even, where they've been adjusted to make sure that the person can hear it based off their hearing level, it is not a hearing test anymore, really. It has almost nothing to do with audibility. If you've made the test purposely loud enough for the person to hear it, now you're getting at a processing measure. I will say that there is a paper out there that I've chatted with the audiologists on, the epidemiologists on, and it's very fascinating. They did a dementia paper, and I think it's a very well done paper, and these are very smart people. But what they used was a speech measure for their hearing, and they came to a conclusion that there may be an association of a different direction, such that dementia could cause the hearing loss. I would say, though, if you use a speech measure, it's very likely that dementia would affect processing speech signals when they're already audible, if that makes sense, right? So it's not so much that there is a peripheral hearing loss there, which is the other literature that you read a lot about, with potentially having a causal relationship, right? Or that direction, at least. I wouldn't really call it causal. I think there's a lot going on there to unpack, but that's a different talk. And we've done a lot of work on that. But I do think that there is not a backwards direction where dementia would really affect our peripheral pure tone audiometry. And we see that in papers that show that adults with dementia can pretty much reliably, year after year, be measured and repeated within the timeframes too. Whereas speech, very much so. Yes, if you have dementia, if you have cognitive decline, processing speech, which is affected by education, cognition, and vocabulary, could be greatly impacted. I will say though, if you use speech measures, they are valuable in different ways, right? They actually do offer some deep insights into how someone is functionally doing. It's just important that you sort of recognize what it is you're measuring, and you really have to just set up your own analyses. We don't have reliable norms, and you have to be super clear and consistent on the instructions because they are not very well done in the many, many different speech measures out there. And if you tell some group people to guess and some not to, you will find that most people will stop guessing at a certain point, even though they could do better. So these are highly contextual, and there's a lot of measurement error and information bias happening in these measures. So again, lots of measures, lots of different levels. It really depends on what you want. When we come into a study, we're usually bombarded with a lot of questions about measuring hearing. People have heard of Shoebox or HearX or all these things. And I think it really, comes down to what's your question of interest? What's the location like? What's the equipment that you're already using, for example? If you're already, just to give a very basic example, Shoebox is on an iPad, HearX, formerly out of South Africa, now recently acquired by a US company, is on a Samsung tablet. If you're using iPads in your study, we probably will tell you that Shoebox is great, even though personally, I love a lot of things about HearX. But if it's not compatible with the rest of the study, we're certainly not going to send field team members out with another tablet if they don't need it, right? So you're often thinking about the context of the study more than you're thinking about what is the best measure necessarily, because they both get you the same pure tone audiometry in the end. They're calibrated, right? And they're FDA approved to hit the same mark. Staff, study site, time. Every study wants to keep it short. I'll show you what we do in LASI and around where we are for time. Training and maintenance matter too. Regular training with audiology and strong QC can be important. I'll show you a little bit of what we do. You have many different places to do things. You can do things with a portable audiometer now in the field. On most tablets, they have a microphone that can be dedicated to monitoring sound during testing, which is amazing. It tells you whether a test is even feasible or reliable or not because sound may have interfered with it. There are these modular whisper room booths that were actually originally, I think, designed for like singing and musicians to use, but they actually get you down to ANSI standards for a hearing test. And then you have these 200,000 up on rods diagnostic booths. That's the one to the far left on the screen. They literally do cost like $200,000, and to install they can be super expensive. You don't need these in most FB studies. Very rarely would you need this. The ANSI standards are based on testing children who have really, really, really good hearing. Um, there are many different types of audiometers. There are portable ones. There are some that are portable from traditional manufacturers. There are now tablet-based ones that offer that monitoring or cloud services too. There are computer-based ones like the Equinox in the middle there that have a large sort of audiometer and then plug into your computer, which have tons and tons of different features. It really just depends on what you need. And so there is no best. I think it has more to do with the measure than the specific audiometer. However, I will say there are screeners out there that are not audiometers. They're just telling you whether or not someone recognized a tone at a certain level, and they don't do thresholds. And this does limit our ability to give deeper information. So this is the Siemens HearCheck. It's used in a lot of studies. There is nothing inherently wrong with this device. There's nothing inherently wrong with saying that you have or don't have hearing loss. What becomes really problematic is we actually don't have measures of where the hearing loss is. I have gone back and tried to figure out where in the HRS families someone started citing different studies. And I'm sure those of you who peer review know this. We have a citation crisis where someone just cites someone else's intro because they used something, or someone cites something that someone else cited. If you go back to the end, the original citation is just provided by Siemens. And they were working with a very, very well-respected audiologist at the NHS, but they didn't validate or really give us anything to say when they say you have mild loss, you have mild loss. And we can't really rate that back to a traditional sort of category. So I think you can probably say with this, do you have hearing loss? Do you potentially have hearing loss, yes or no, based off of hitting all six or not? But it's really hard to get into the nuances here that are used in the broader literature. And the truth is, in the broader literature, just having hearing loss or not is not always associated with a lot of our outcomes. That's a very blunt instrument, depending on your age group. I'll also just say there are reliability issues with something like this. The product matters. I know this is very affordable, but it's using essentially an analog amplifier wrapped in a little bit of sheet metal in the interior, which two drops and is gone, versus a digital system that is based on chips that you can drop a Samsung tablet and it will stay calibrated. You don't want to drop, you don't want to crack the screen, but you guys all know this, especially those of you who have kids like I do. You can drop a lot of these and they can take a beating. Different earphones can matter here. There are people that will, push so hard for the inserts, but that does require otoscopy and that takes time. If you're going to put something in someone's ear, you need to look in their ear. And that's a lot of extra training. So over the ear headphones are fine, right? One thing to just remember, that I think the question matters the most, but also this is a collaboration. And one thing I've just noticed as a person who really does sort of sit with a foot in both of these worlds is it's like the extremes are the worst on both sides. We really are collaborating, and a good team has representation from hearing and public health. And ivory tower epidemiologists can totally produce low impact and misinterpreted work because they didn't get any insights from a hearing professional and misinterpreted the actual hearing measure or got it wrong. But it's also true that a lot of the hearing professionals, if you have a doctorate in measuring hearing, they just go overboard, right? And they're usually presenting what we see in the clinic to those in public health, encouraging us to use really, really over the top methods that, could take up to 20, 30, 40 minutes and are just not necessary, right? It's a big difference between what you see in clinic that represents less than 1% of the population versus 99% out there, right? We don't see that many asymmetries actually. Unilateral hearing loss is rare. Sudden hearing loss is rare. Post retrocochlear pathologies causing processing disorders are rare, right? So they may show up in an epi study, but they're going to be like one out of thousands, right? We're talking less than a fraction of 1% of a person of the population. So I will wrap in the last, I think, 5 minutes here is what I have left on a case study from LASI Dodd. And this actually in the beginning I started with, I think, just generally where we usually start. When we're a year out from the study starting, we're talking with whatever the study coordinators, if they're sites or the field team members. Generally, we're using pure tone audiometry that I presented first. That is usually what people settle on just because it is that criterion standard. And most people want to study hearing loss and cognition. That is the hot topic right now. But like I said, there are other measures, and we do have cases of studies using a self-report measure. We've used the self-report measure from NHANES a lot, where we've created measurement error models because in that study we have self-report plus a lot of demographics that I told you about earlier help predict how accurate they are. And the objective, the pure tone audiometry, and we can kind of create a model that says, yeah, this 90-year-old Caucasian male said he didn't have hearing loss, but all the data says that he's 99% likely to have some hearing loss or mild. So we actually can move it using measurement error techniques. But it just depends on the study's needs or on what they have and what they want in the end. Like all questions, how comfortable are you with selection bias, information bias, and precision in the estimate? And so 8 months out, we're usually doing site visits, making sure equipment is ordered by 6 months. It does take a long time if you need to order equipment. Most audiology is not a huge field, and a lot of equipment is actually produced ready-made. Tablets have changed that a little bit, but even with the tablets, the actual outside equipment that converts the signal to a calibrated signal can be hard. 3 months out, we're making sure equipment is installed, initial training. We usually do some sort of group training and then try to watch everybody do it for certification purposes. And then we're doing a lot of QC follow-up. The LASI Dodd study was a lesson in how to do this for us because we'd done it many times, but not during COVID with a 12-hour time difference. So we really learned a lot about ourselves and training people and doing online training. And I think actually you can still scan this QR code, and we have a lot of on-demand instructional videos now that we're big on the portable tablet audiometers, not just because of what they provide for us in terms of flexibility and ease of use. We love them because we can just put our videos on there in real-time format and stuff in our deep training videos that our field members can actually just pop up whenever they want to help remind them. It's super useful. The tablets are nice because they do provide cloud-based storage. They're also wonderful because they've really taken to using automated algorithms to do the testing that really takes a lot of this manual labor portion of like trying to remember how to do threshold testing off the technician. But they still let the technician drive the test, right? So the technician drives the speed and pacing of the test, which is really important in aging studies where a self test would just be too much on a lot of our participants, and we'd end up with these long time periods and lots of user error. We do use the HearX in LASI Dodd. They had a Samsung tablet. They added features for us. I will admit I love working with HearX. One advantage of using an Android system is that it is openware. A disadvantage of using a system like Shoebox that Jen Schrack or Vicky Friedman could tell you about is Apple does not care about any researchers, and Apple will update, and engineers have to respond to Apple, right? Versus a Android product that can be locked down and closed. So there are some differences in what you may choose for feasibility purposes. Like if you're going to be in the field all the time, even if you're already using Apple, you may want to just think a little bit about, you may lose some data for a month while engineers are trying to keep up with any changes that could mess with calibration. And it's completely unpredictable. Apple does not give a warning more than 1 month out. So in LASI Dodd, I'll actually just jump to the hard numbers. This is from, this is not complete data. This is actually one of the quality study checks we did and part of our sort of innovation sampling and our pilot that we produced, pilot paper on the tests we produced. We stopped it after, I can't remember exactly how many months. I think almost 3 months. Yeah, 3 months. And so out of 2,092 participants at this point, we had tested 1,654. When we stopped it, we went back and checked on what the reasons were. Some just skipped the test, for whatever reason. We were able to get a 25%, basically 26% return. And then in cloud data, it turned out we had some missing cloud data, and we recovered the majority of it. And actually, within 6 months of this, we recovered all of it. It was just a matter of when you have people in really rural regions not uploading all the time, we had things on the audiometers and not in the cloud. But it is something to just consider from a logistics standpoint in the practical side. So in the end, once we did our recovery phase, we had 91% completion of testing. Once we fully recovered the rest of the missing cloud data, we were up to like 96 or 95%. What we do, and this is something we've developed and we've worked on it a lot, and we've changed it in different studies. And in fact, now we've actually given it to other studies. When Allison talks to you later, Dr. Aiello talks to you later, she'll tell you we gave them this, and they're doing it themselves now. They have their own version of the algorithm. We look for what we call pink flags. And what I mean by pink flags, these are things that are very unlikely in the audiogram. These are what we find during testing, differences in frequencies where you see these big jumps, like at 1,000 hertz versus 2,000 hertz, they're adjacent. The cochlea is organized like a piano. They are literally physiologically, anatomically adjacent. They should not be that different. Differences in the pure tone average between the ear, differences between ears at a specific frequency. Anytime there's ANSI standard noise levels during testing, or test durations of longer than 10 minutes or shorter than 2 minutes. Those are very unlikely. So we flag things based off this. This is not perfect. It actually will flag about 50% of data in most studies. But then what we do is we create those audiogram visuals and we send them out to 2 independent audiologists who can review it rapidly. We're talking less than 10 minutes, per review. And they quickly review them, and you end up with like a reading core, basically for this. And they give you this we call it plausibility. Like, is this a plausible audiogram or not in the end? So these are what these might look like, right? The top 2 are acceptable. You have pretty much exactly what you would expect to see. One ear is orange, one ear is green, and they're moving about the same, and they're just moving at like a sloping figure, which is normal. However, the other 2, very unlikely. And I think if I remember, these also had some noise flags. These are very implausible audiograms. Possible? Sure. But probable? Absolutely not. So we will reject something like this. In the end, like I said, we flagged 50% of cases. The most common reasons are noise and that we have a strange sloping pattern to the test. Again, this is a conservative approach. We have worked on a little bit to be a little bit more precise. And in ad health, they'll talk about in a younger population, we really didn't. This was way too conservative. We were flagging all sorts of things because people are faster. In the end, only 19 tests, less than 1.1% of the data were deemed truly implausible. So we kicked out very few tests saying, hey, it's user error, whatever, it just happens. From a timing perspective, when we started LASI in week one, it took us 280 seconds of test time, and that's added on to 2 minutes of sort of setup time. And then by week 19, we were down to 226 seconds. So we can get it pretty rapid, and we're getting a lot of information here. We are getting a full 4-frequency audiogram plus some high frequency information to look at that slope and aging perspective. We always check ecologically, does it look like other studies of similar age samples? This one does, comparing it to NHATS. And we always just take a peek at like the grand mean averages to make sure they're relatively doing the same thing that we would expect aging across the world to do. And does it correlate with age or urban versus rural? Urban versus rural is actually a high predictor of hearing loss in the United States and around the world. So with that, we thought it was pretty feasible, good team approach. Sorry, I went over 4 minutes. I wasn't paying attention. But the QA/QC, I think, is key. And I think what you should take away is that it's not about any one specific brand. It's really about the tests you choose and thinking about a strong collaborative approach, I think, in the end, where no one side is better than the other necessarily. But when we meet in the middle as epidemiologists with our content area experts from medicine or allied health fields, we usually can produce some really, really strong, amazing results.
Great. Thank you, Nick. Question. I have one to get kicked off. You mentioned that, some of the implausible not recordings, but graphs sort of come from noise. So is this like ambient noise that happens at the same time as the test? Is that something that the device is also picking up at the same time? Or is it something that the interviewers are having to record
So
as
with the
well?
portable audiometers, with those tablet ones, they actually tell us. So we get sort of this complex sheet at the end from the cloud that actually says at each frequency measured, was there noise during the test above an acceptable level? And so there is an ANSI standard for this wherever the American National Standards Institute actually keeps their booklets on some shelf, behind gold plated doors because they all cost like $35 just to access. There is an ANSI standard and it'll pull it out for you. So what I was actually saying is that those audiograms were funky in shape and we were flagged on that. In both of those ones I gave you the example, there was also a noise flag because they're not mutually exclusive. And we immediately were like, oh, this is probably just ambient noise, messed with the testing. A truck went by, a plane flew over, whatever happened. Somebody came in screaming during the assessment in a clinic, laughing, and we think that's why. It's very rare in that sort of flag system we use for it to be one thing. We usually see like two or three concurrently that really make it easy for us to say, yeah, that's not plausible.
Yeah. Well, that's helpful that the device is recording that at the same time.
Yeah, great information. Hi, Eileen.
Hi, and Nick, that's really good. I wonder if you, by any chance, have looked at the first wave of LASI when we basically looked at the results of the audiology and threw them out and said they're no good because of ambient noise. I wonder if you have just any can actually document now that those are bad results and how they were done, just to help people learn how you can do it badly and then improve, maybe.
Yeah. So I don't even know. It may have been some of you've done a lot on the team. Jen Cook gave me that hair check data when I started with her, and I looked at it and was like, I don't understand any of this. There are people who missed the last one, or sorry, they'll get the last one, which should be the hardest, but not the first one. The orders were out. Like I
Okay.
didn't understand. But the idea, and then there was some self-report noise during testing. The idea of looking at the two separate ones, we may be able to look a little bit here for some sort of like a validity approach of sensitivity specificity across the two. We
Yeah.
wouldn't be able to, or you know what? Actually, we could use the geriatric assessment self-report of noise during because it's in both wave one and two. It's not necessarily the noise during our testing, but in general, the clinic, the ambient noise. We could do that. I'm sure that Sandy could provide that data if we want to do sort of a methodsy piece.
Yeah, I think we have the data. I think it might be interesting just as a
Yeah.
methody type thing, and that's what this is about. But that was such a disaster, and we spent such a long time trying to make sense out of what seemingly you never could do that.
Yeah, yeah. I also remember several field team members showing me the devices and they were like falling apart. I mean, literally like, but like I said, it's the cost, right? It just wasn't designed to be in the field like that. It was designed to be in a very specific area. So there's lots of factors. That's a great idea. Thank you.
That's the hallmark of the network. Learn from others so you don't have to make the same mistake. Any other questions for Nick before we move on? Okay, thank you, Nick. Okay, next up we have Allison Aiello from Columbia University talking with us about their experience in the AdHealth study.
Okay, great. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm going to get this going. Let's see. PowerPoint here. All right. Okay. Can you all see that? Let me get into presenter view.
Yeah.
Okay. Can they see
We
the
are
slides?
seeing
Yep, we're
Okay.
good.
Okay, excellent. All right, great. Thanks, everyone. It's great to be here. Great to be speaking after Nick, getting all of the expertise from him on the audiology part. And this presentation is really a view from a user's point of view, us as the AdHealth team users, and working very closely with Nick and the experts like Nick and Clarice to help us do this and add this really smoothly to AdHealth. And it was a lot of their interactions that helped us along the way, which I'll talk about in this presentation. So this is very much a team project. So I just wanted to take a minute to acknowledge my collaborator and MPI on the AdHealth Cognitive Assessment Physical and Sensory Function Project, which we call AdCaps in AdHealth. Dr. Robert Hummer at UNC, as well as our amazing team of staff members and trainees. As many of these folks helped us on these adding the hearing, as well as many of the other measures that we had in the AdCaps battery, and our incredible consultants, particularly Nick Reed and Clarice Myers, who are our audiology consultants along the way, and our wonderful program official, Amelia Carricker, and our project scientist, Emily Hooker. And this is something that was of interest kind of across the board to include hearing in AdHealth. And it was particularly because of AdHealth as a study, the kinds of data that we've been collecting, as well as the age range and getting this kind of baseline data in AdHealth. But before I jump into our experience with HearX, I wanted to give a brief background on AdHealth. It's a prospective longitudinal study that has been collecting data since adolescence with sampling from schools in 1994 and 95 with almost 30 years of follow-up. It's a nationally representative cohort with over 20,000 individuals at the beginning of the study. It's had excellent retention, ensuring that the findings are generalizable to the US population. It includes multi-level data collection from biological samples to contextual measures. It really provides opportunities to understand how exposures across the life course and the social environment influence biology, aging, and health. It also lends itself to intergenerational insights because since the first wave, there's been data that were collected from the parents of the AdHealth participants, and there's now a third wave of the AdHealth parent study, and that data is being collected in progress. And it focuses on measures related to aging and cognition that are parallel with the children, the participants of AdHealth. So this is going to allow us to understand really the familial, social, and genetic influences on health and aging across the life course. So the AdHealth study also has an innovative sampling design, which you'll hear a little bit more about today, specifically for Wave 6. And has a sampling design that includes collection of biomarker data as well as health data. And this is across race and ethnic groups, which is oversampled. and biomarker and health measures across time too. So as of the most recent wave, AdHealth Wave 6, we've added new multimode cognitive, physical, and sensory function data, and we have integrated the HearX platform, and while our participants were ages 39 to 51 with an average age of 44 years at Wave 6. And just to kind of mention this, I know that Nick presented many of the studies and the data that have been collected, and the majority of data that exists, especially at any kind of representative study, are primarily in older age populations or some in younger age populations, but rarely in this kind of like early middle age stage as we have with AdHealth. So just to kind of give you a little idea about the design here for AdHealth, it's for Wave 6, it was broken up into two main samples, Sample 1 and Sample 2. So Sample 1 covers everyone who takes the survey on the web, and Sample 1 participants who are eligible for Wave 6 participation, but did not respond to the web-based version of the survey were given the opportunity to take the survey in person. So there's a small number of people who take it in person also. And Sample 2 is a subsample of over 2,600 individuals who were oversampled by race and ethnicity. And the Sample 2 participants were asked to take the survey as well as the full ADCAPS protocol in person. ADCAPS included a number of cognitive measures, including 2 measures that have been collected over time in AdHealth, both the word recall and the digit span backwards, as well as new measures like the NIH Toolbox, the Test My Brain, which was also included in Sample 1. So everybody in AdHealth gets Test My Brain, which has a set of cognitive assessments, 4 cognitive assessments. And then at Wave 6, we had, about 12,000 individuals of both Sample 1 and Sample 2 participants combined who completed the survey. The HearX that's in our AdCaps battery. So individuals in the Sample 2 were eligible to take the HearX, and I'll tell you a little bit more about their eligibility as I go on. So on the practical side, really the first step, and Nick talked about this a little bit, is really deciding which program to use. And, there's several, and we looked at several, but when we talked with Nick to really kind of get his feedback and we decided on using HearX, which was really based on their recommendations as well as costs and other things that we might want to measure during our home visits. So for example, while the HearX platform, doesn't allow you to put all sorts of different things on it, there's a few programs that it does allow you to include, which can be useful also for other purposes of measurement, like vision, for example. It allows you to add peak to it. So we went about developing the HearX contract to really fit our needs for what we're going to use in AdHealth, and that took a few months to complete. And really having our audiology consultants on the team was key. They helped us in developing our protocols, our staff training, our implementation. And as we got started with the data collection, they also helped us with our data QC along the way to make sure that what we got were valid results. And they also are even now at this point where we're developing our users guides, giving us input on our user guides. So again, a big thank you to Nick Reed and Clarice Myers for their wonderful help and collaboration all the way. It was essential. So in AdHealth, any participant who had a Sample 2 interview and completed it in person was eligible for the hearing assessment. So we use screening questions to determine participant eligibility for several other factors when we were in their homes, and we asked them whether they had, for example, an ear infection. Did they have current ear pain? Were they using hearing aids that they couldn't remove? Or did they have a cochlear implant that they couldn't remove, for example? Those individuals wouldn't have been eligible to take the assessment, but all other individuals who didn't have these ineligible criteria were able to take it. So the HearX Hear Test program was administered to Sample 2 participants using the portable Android-based audiometer, and it produced the tones in the audible range so that we could measure hearing. And it was pre-installed by the company onto a Samsung Galaxy Tab A7, and the equipment package also included Sennheiser HD 280 Pro headphones, so it came with the headphones, and It produced the data that contained the hearing thresholds that we wanted to measure in decibels of hearing and an audiogram of, and it provided a result of the pure tone average for a pure tone average for each year, which was based on the softest intensity in which participants can hear a sound. One thing to note is that HearX Hear Test only works on the Android devices that I mentioned, so that does limit your ability to add other software. But they did have agreements with other platforms such as Peak, so if you want to do, for example, vision testing with hearing, you could do it together on the Android platform. So the full frequency range of Hear Test has 125 up to 8,000 hertz. But we manually selected only 5 frequencies ranging from 500 to 8,000 hertz. And these 5 frequencies were selected as those that really would be best suited for the AdHealth participants, given their age range and our ability to detect changes in their hearing over time. And 5 saved time too. It would have taken us several minutes longer if we had all of the ranges, so it made a big difference. And we had a number of other assessments that were going on at the same, before Hear Test, and we wanted to make sure that we were able to do this as efficiently as possible in the households. So overall, we found that participants really enjoyed the hearing protocol, and they were very interested in the testing. They wanted to know their results. In Wave 6, we did not share the hearing results, but we are going to propose to share Hear Test results in future AdHealth waves, given the interests that participants had. And they sometimes had questions about certain aspects of the protocol that we noted too. So for example, the hearing test was the only assessment that we gave where interviewers needed to stand behind the participant. So everything else was being done in front of them as they were talking to them, looking them in the eye, going over these assessments. But this one, they were actually standing in back of them. So we actually updated our protocol script to let participants know that, the reason that we're doing this is because we don't want them to kind of see the hand movements while administering the tones. The interviewer was administering the tones so that we would not influence their responses. Every now and then, we also encountered a participant having something on their head, like a headband or a hat, that needed to be removed because, it could affect sort of the comfort level and placement of the earphones. The one other thing that this is mentioned by Nick also is that, the headphones were not noise canceling. So our interviewers often ask participants to reduce background noise. And this could have meant asking them, for example, to turn off a TV in the background or even a loud HVAC system that was going off during the assessment. So there were a total of 2,613 participants in Sample 2 of AdHealth at Wave 6. And we had quite a high response rate among these individuals. That were eligible for the hearing test. It was 94.8%. And then those that completed, it was 98.5% among those who were eligible completed the HearX, which is a great response rate. We were very excited about that and the fact that people mostly enthusiastically took the assessment. I want to mention though, among the eligible cases, 37 did not complete the assessment, and this included people who ended the interview early. So hearing was actually the last of our assessments. So after almost 40 minutes of cognitive and physical assessments, it was the last one. So, we actually think we did quite well, given that this was a possibility for a break-off point. And in addition, 15 of those 37, it wasn't because they didn't complete it. It was just that there was a technical issue that came up during the assessment. So for example, data didn't save, or the program needed updating and there was no internet connection at that time. But this was pretty much a rare occurrence overall. So we also had a few equipment considerations that came up that might be important to note if you use a system, especially where we have AdHealth, where we have interviewers all over the country and we're constantly scheduling interviewers. So the headphones that come with HearX require annual calibration. So when you order, it's really important to have backups. We actually planned for backups, which is a good thing because it was helpful. We always had equipment in circulation and available. The tablet also comes with a case that you see here, holding both the tablet and the earphones. unfortunately, we had several interviewers who reported that the case handles would break, they'd kind of snap off. So we told our interviewers to hold the case from the top and bottom, but we also decided to purchase a sturdier case with hand straps for the interviewers. And they actually really liked the hand strap because it made administering the test easier too. They could kind of hold it in their hand and administer it. So at the completion of the HEAR test task, we also asked interviewers to input notes about the test and relay any issues that came up. And we then qualitatively decoded them. So there weren't a lot of issues overall. The most common were administration or instruction issues, of which there were about 0.77%. For example, an interviewer mentioned hitting a response by accident or not starting the timer. And this was followed by technical issues, which were any issue involving things such as, like I mentioned, the software or updating issues that had to be done before they could get started. All the rest of the qualitative comments were quite rare. There were things like people being tired over time, for example, or having low effort. But for the most part, these were rare occurrences. The duration of the test was relatively fast on average, about 3 minutes, 30 seconds. Tracking the interviewers, they were able to do this faster and faster. They got used to the setup and they were able to conduct it smoothly, and the duration decreased over time in terms of how long it took them from start to finish. So since the platform measures ambient noise, and Nick had mentioned this, it also flags automatically the ambient noise. And what's interesting is that in the slide that I just showed you before, there were some cases where an interviewer would mention ambient noise. We haven't done this yet because the data just arrived recently. We're just finished cleaning the data and getting the data ready for users in AdHealth. But what we haven't looked at yet is to examine whether the noise flags are associated with some of the qualitative responses on noise in the households, which we have that data, which I think will be helpful. But sometimes even when the interviewer or participant didn't notice or hear background noises or sounds, it would still pick up a sound in the background. So as Nick mentioned, this is a pretty common occurrence in the field in non-clinical settings, especially at the lower ranges, but less so at the mid and higher ranges. And so, so for example, there's like a sensitivity to an air conditioner running in the background, or even a very low TV. We really tried to implement in our protocol that we ask participants to help reduce these noises when it was possible in the household. So I'm very excited to report that we now have all our hearing data cleaned and are just finishing up our users guides at this point. The data will be released over the next month, and AdHealth users will have access to these new data. So I highly encourage all of you to use these data in the future. Our hearing scores for the right ear are plotted by age on the left graph. We can see that the scores vary in the AdHealth population, and they slightly trend as expected with higher PTA, higher pure tone average, among those of older age. We also see that those with a college or more education also have slightly better hearing scores than those with lower levels of education. So there's some interesting trends here. We've also looked at whether it was positively correlated with self-reported hearing scale, and we do see that. So it is significantly correlated with how people report their hearing, which is interesting. We just asked them, which statement best described your hearing without a hearing aid or other assisted device, and they could say it was excellent, good, a little trouble, moderate hearing trouble, or a lot of trouble, or they couldn't hear at all. So this was interesting that there's some correlation even at these younger ages that people are already recognizing in terms of issues with their hearing. So HEAR test overall was well accepted in AdHealth. We had excellent response rates. We had very few concerns. Training interviewers to use the HEAR test was relatively straightforward, with all of the help from our consultants and giving us support along the way. We had just a few minor issues, including the case breaking and some of the noise in the households that we had to be attentive to. But as we can see, the data fall within the expected ranges and correlations, and the quality control was really great that we had in terms of the support and assistance on the study. So we're excited to dig into these data in the future. I just want to acknowledge our AdHealth support from NIH and the many folks that have been involved in AdHealth over time. Thank you. Be happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much, Allison.
Yeah.
I am going to summarize a little bit of what's going on in the chat and ask some follow-up questions related to those. So there have been some questions related to returning results to people. You mentioned you haven't done it yet, but you're planning on it. Nick has chimed in and said other studies have done it. Could either you or Nick talk about what would you give back to people? Is it their full audiology graph, or is it like just some indication of hearing loss in either ear? So what are you thinking along those lines?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things we were thinking of is, giving them back their PTA scores, but we'd be open. I don't know, Nick, maybe you can give us input too, what you think, if there's something that we should give them above and beyond that, maybe their pure tone scores and kind of where they fall on that gradient in terms of their hearing. But
Yeah, I think we actually sent you our ERIC results page too, like at one point. We've done it differently for different studies because some studies have very strict protocols where they only want like a one sentence part of a big thing. But in general, we actually give the full graph because, for example, in Ad Health, they're testing beyond that 4-frequency pure tone average that we talked about that's mostly used. They're also doing 8,000 hertz, and that's because that's more likely to show a difference in middle-aged adults because we lose our hearing in high to low patterns. So we usually give the full graph, and then we give that sort of World Health Organization standard 4-frequency with sort of a checkbox as to where they fall within it, and then what it sort of means, and then some very strict language that this is not diagnostic because we haven't done your full auditory system and all that stuff. But people tend to like to have the graph because they can take it to an audiologist and they can kind of quickly look at the whole show. Because the truth, just so everyone knows, in audiology clinics, if you ever said to diagnose or categorize somebody based off that 4-frequency pure tone average, you might have a gun pointed at you from the audiologist. They hate that. They have very specific ways they do it. Nothing wrong with that. I mean, it's not something that transfers across very well. It should, but that's a different story.
Great. Janet, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, I was just curious for HearX, is it subscription based? So when you buy the headphones, do you have to return them, or is it something that you keep as a group?
yeah, I'm not sure about that, Nick. I don't think we return them, but because we have RTI do our assessments, so they have the equipment. But I don't think that they've returned them, as far as I know. I don't recall that.
Yeah, they have multiple models. It does have a subscription element to it, but they work with researchers to, work within the research paradigm. The point of the subscription is actually that every year they just ship you a new set of headphones and you ship back the old ones. So that way you're not dealing with calibration issues. In the real world, your clinic would actually need a visit from this person who literally is taking out like weights and measures instruments to make sure this is perfect and precise. Whereas that subscription model sort of does that, but it's less on software support. I will say if we want to contrast it with Shoebox, they're charging a subscription for software support because their engineers are working around the clock to keep up with Apple. So there is a slight difference there in what you're actually being charged for.
Yeah. And we needed ours for a long period of time too, right? So they were like out in circulation. We first piloted it. So we piloted it in terms of our assessment, bought a few at that point, and then bought additional ones after that. So we kept the same ones in circulation. So I think we may have done something that was a purchase and not actually a subscription where we returned anything.
Right. Let me just ask one question and then we'll get to your question, Margarita. In the chat, it came up and Nick answered it, but just for the benefit of everyone, a question came up about whether you can use your own tablet or you have to use the one from the company.
Yeah, we tried. We wanted to kind of push for that to purchase our own tablets and do it, but that wasn't possible. At least in our experience. I don't know if anybody has had different experience with HearX, but we had to use their tablet. And Nick mentioned like, oh, well, we don't want people to have to go around with multiple tablets. We literally had multiple tablets because we had an assessment from NIH Toolbox that we needed to use on Apple iPad. So, and then we also had the tablets, the Androids. So we had multiple, equipment pieces for our interviewers to bring to the home. So it was a lot, but they got, after a while, they did a fantastic job. Really got used to it, knew exactly what piece of equipment goes where and what to pull out, and it ended up working quite well for us. But if you can reduce, I definitely would recommend that because it does make things a little bit easier for everyone to handle.
Great. Thank you. Margarita, you had a question?
Yeah, just a quick question, Allison. You mentioned that the headphones were not noise canceling, and I was curious to just ask why that's the case, because I would have thought it would be better if they're noise canceling. So yeah, just curious.
Yeah. I'm going to let Nick answer this because I see him shaking his head. And I feel like we pinged you with that question many times early on in the study too, Nick. So I'll let you go ahead.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. They're noise attenuating. So they offer 30 decibels of attenuation based off the foam, the acoustic foam inside them and the seal. Noise canceling refers to at least a Genome circuit or a different circuit. That's engineering talk to make me feel like I'm smart. All it is something that reverses the signal to 180 degrees to cancel it out. A noise canceling set would actually mess with the pure tones themselves because it doesn't discriminate sound and it would cancel out the signal you're trying to measure. And so you actually can't fully do this that way. You have to use, a little bit of an old school sort of foam attenuation. So it does block some sound. It's just that it's not perfect, right?
Interesting. Thank you.
Lastly, an epidemiology question and one of a practical nature, which is the question came up about does AdHealth plan on repeating the measure? And Bob chimed in and said you do. But in thinking about this, how often, and I'm guessing this is age related, but how often would we want to measure hearing?
Yeah, I mean, I guess at this
Nick's
age
laughing.
range, I think
He's like,
I
can't
know.
answer that question,
And
Jessica.
there's not as much known in this age range too, right? So, at the kind of population level, I think it's still unclear. We're already seeing variability, so I wouldn't be surprised if that variability, I don't know, every, few years. Nick, what do you think? What are your thoughts?
Yeah. Hearing changes really slow and really insidious. And my personal request to everyone is please let's test it annually. Like let's give it 5 years so that we can actually characterize that change before we give up on it. But the truth is it does change so slowly that you don't even expect a clinical change in 5-year periods. We have NHATS data, and we have an annual change paper that might be out finally. It was accepted a while ago, where we show that there's a nonlinear path. People under 60 are changing about a decibel a year. And to let you know, we don't even test in decibel increments. We test in 5 decibel increments. So that is so far below just like test retest. It's almost comical how slow the change is. But it also says something about we don't know. So, I think your first point, Allison, is like we want annual testing now, especially in this age group, because earlier when you said this group doesn't get tested, I laughed. Most people get their last hearing test is when they're in first grade. That's the last time they get tested until like somebody finally, when they're like 70, forces them to. So there's a really long period where we just don't know anything about the population. So even though it is slow and comically slow, we want to characterize that eventually.
Yeah, I just wanted to add like a clinical perspective too, because I have a lot of patients coming in, and clinically we recommend annual hearing tests. But most of the time, if this is an aging-related hearing loss, they go very slow. If it's stable, then I tell them to come back after a couple of years. And I think if we can capture that, I mean, even something like 5 years or even 10 years, I think it would be a huge win in some sort of a population-based study.
Yeah. Great. Thank you. Thank you, Allison, again. Okay, moving on. We have Janet Choi from USC talking with us about her experience measuring this in senior centers.
All right, let me make sure that everyone can see the slides.
Yep.
Okay, is this the presentation view?
No, it's like with the notes and
Okay.
the preview.
So I
Yeah.
think someone taught me how to do this before. Maybe this one? No. Oh, did it
Yep,
work?
that looks good. Yep. Thank you.
All right. Yeah, good morning and good afternoon for those of you who are in a different time zone. So my name is Janet Choi. I'm an ENT physician at University of Southern California. And my clinical work and research focuses on hearing loss in older adults. So I actually, get to talk to a lot of my older adult patients who are dragged to the clinic by the family members, although they think that their hearing is perfectly fine. And so for today, I think we really have a, terrific panels and audience, hoping to continue this lively discussion. But I'll talk more about the key hearing measures in population-based study and also insights from the senior center hearing screening study that I did using a different device. It's actually called the GSI AMTAS Flex device. So I have no financial disclosure. So objectives for the my portion, I'll review some of the key hearing measures that we can use in the population-based studies, and then I'll talk about what I learned from this community-based study, and then end with some specific considerations about measuring hearing in the field settings. So, okay. So I put together 3 key points for objective hearing measures. Nick and Allison both, did a great job kind of going over why we need to have an objective hearing measure. So I'm not going to bore you with another long slides about it. This is just a paper that I published years ago, just looking at how the association with different outcomes changes when you're using objective hearing measures versus self-reported hearing measures. So it's something available as a reference if you wanted to look at. And then second part is if feasible to get the objective hearing measures, it's good to have audiometry data across multiple frequencies. Just looking at that audiogram on the right side, we went over how there are different frequencies of pure tone that we can measure. For HRS study, we did use the HearCheck in 2016 and 2018. So that data has 2 different frequency data, one for 1,000 and 3,000, but they came at different tones that was played. So it's not necessarily a continuous data, but it gives us a score of 0 to 3 per each frequencies. But NHATS, which I used a lot for all my past publications, but they had the luxury of having the truck going around. So they have all this sound treated booth that was already available. And then the last part is that if we can really have the repeated objective measure over time in a population-based study, that would be a very unique and powerful thing that we can use. I wanted to use this as an example because this is a very brilliant study design that came from a UK group using the HRS data from this was published in 2018. So this is before the objective data was available. But they were still able to look at the trajectories of how the episodic memory score changes over time before hearing aid use versus after hearing aid use. And if we can add some sort of objective measurement before around the time of the hearing aid adoption and afterwards, I think that would be really unique and powerful thing that we can answer a lot of questions. Because it's still a million-dollar question in our field. Does hearing loss really cause accelerated cognitive decline? We don't have answer to that. And also whether using hearing aid actually prevent or mitigate the cognitive decline for those who have hearing loss. We still don't have clear answer to that either. There are a lot of RCTs, recent results are coming out, but which I think will be more difficult to do any additional RCTs moving forward, kind of thinking about the ethical concerns, because we can't really have a control group to tell them not to use a hearing aid using forward. So if we can have a longitudinal observational study that have multiple hearing measurement, I think that would be really important. Because that can answer some of the additional questions that we have in a clinical setting. Does hearing loss severity at the time of hearing aid adoption really affect the cognition. For example, I have patients who come in with like a really mild, like subclinical hearing loss or very mild high frequency hearing loss, comes in and tells me whether, do I need to buy the hearing aids when they feel that they don't necessarily have any trouble hearing. But I saw the site on the news that the hearing loss causes dementia. So I wanted to do something about it. Do I need hearing aids? So I get the question a lot from my patients. And also the duration of the hearing loss too, whether they had hearing loss for a couple of years versus 10 years or 20 years before they started using hearing aids. I think we still don't have answer whether that impacts how much we can impact the cognitive decline over time too. So, and I wanted to go over a couple of the self-reported hearing-related questionnaires too. I know Nick already kind of touched upon this a little bit, but HRS does ask a question about, ask the participants rate their hearing while they're using hearing aids as usual, which is a very different question from the question that we ask in the NHANES, how to describe your hearing without using hearing aids, which focuses more on the biological hearing loss. I mean, either way, they're both kind of crapshoot depending on which demographics that we're asking. But using hearing aid as usual question kind of gets more confounded because it's kind of trying to understand, trying to have implication of what types of hearing aid use and how much benefits they're getting from them. And another question is about the hearing aid use. So kind of two typical questions they would ask in the epidemiological studies is whether they ever use hearing aid use. And then some, a little better version will be they ask a follow-up question about if they ever use hearing aids, whether they actually use it regularly or the frequency of use on top of it. The ever use is kind of difficult if we're trying to look at the association of how much of impact it has on health outcomes. Because the studies have shown that about 40% of those people who own hearing aids don't necessarily use them. And if we consider people who even just try hearing aids and return them, which is I see a lot of time in my clinical practice, that number will be even higher. So ever hearing aid use doesn't really capture how often this person is actually using or benefiting from the hearing aids. Just as an example, I just added this study that I published with Eileen and Jennifer last year. We were using the NHANES database to try to look at the association between the hearing aid use and mortality. And for this study, I was able to kind of group them into never users, non-regular users, and regular users. And in this study, we did find that there was a significant association with the hearing aid use and lower risks of mortality for the regular users, but we didn't find that for the non-regular users. And lastly, something we could think of is just trying to incorporate the age. Since we don't have this data for the previous cohort, something we could ask is that age at the time when they started using hearing aids regularly. Or we could even ask something more about the etiologies of hearing loss or severity of hearing loss. But at the same time, the reliability of those two questions, the last two questions, are probably not that great for these population. And for the later half of the talk, I just wanted to show you the GSI AMTAS device that I used for the community-based hearing screening project. This one, the company is based in Minnesota, USA. And I'll share the quotes that I got since probably a lot of you are interested. So for them, they use the Android software. For that particular device, I think they actually give you the Microsoft Surface. So if you purchase with the device, it would be around $4,000. If you purchase without the tablet, it was about $2,400. I looked at the Shoebox and HearX as well. The reason I went with the AMTAS was just mainly because I have funding now, but I don't know, how long this funding is going to last. So I just wanted something that I can buy and own and not think about it, and then just have a minimal renewal maintenance fee. And then in that sense, the GSI MTAS was the one that worked out for me. And I also have, Microsoft Surface tablet that I haven't just been sitting around. So I just installed the software myself. So I know we kind of already went over the Shoebox. This was the quote that I got from them at the time. So this was earlier this year. And to tell you that I was just buying two devices, which is going to be very different if you're buying it for this large population based database, because I'm pretty sure they're going to give you some sort of a discount. But if you were to just buy one device, the Shoebox would have been around $3,000 for the first year, but then it's a subscription model, and then you have to pay still $1,500 every year moving forward. And then this was the publicly available price that was available online. So I would assume, and HearX is like a good middle ground. So, the purchase device for the initial, it kind of ranges based on what option that you choose. And then there's a sort of annual fee that goes into it, just like what Nick was saying earlier, that there's one to support software and all of that. It was a little bit higher than AMTAS, but not as much compared to Shoebox. So this is what my package looked like. So when we purchased the device, it came with the bag. It was pretty sturdy. We didn't have any issues with the handles. It came with the radio ear, the over-the-ear headphone, which actually a lot of audiologists use in the clinical setting. And then I installed the software on this Microsoft Surface tablet. But the second device, I installed it in my laptop. So any sort of Android-based device should work. It also comes with the noise meter and then the stand and then all the connections that goes with it. This is what the software looks like. So when you start the program, this is the initial screen view, and then it lets you put in the patient information afterwards. And then it gives you instructions to, apply headphones. And then you're supposed to, and then the headphone plays a sound, one tone in each left and right side. And then the participant is supposed to say, yes, I hear the tone, and then we can move on. And then this is the instructions that they give. It has an option of playing a video, but we found that it's a lot simpler and quicker to just have our research assistant to explain what to look for afterwards. And then once the screening starts, it gives you this view, listen for a tone. And then once it plays a sound, so it'll be something like beep, and then it will just have the participant have to tap on the screen, yes or no. And then they do this kind of repeatedly, and there's a progress bar that gets that's at the bottom. And then once you're done, so it's an automated protocol. So it just plays this tone kind of throughout the entire screening, which takes about 5 to 10 minutes. And then after the screening is done, you can exit out and then go to the cloud view. And then you can pull up all the audiogram report views from there. This is just a sample of what the audiogram report looks like. It gives you two options. So one's the audiology view. So this has more technical information. It calculates the speech frequency per tone average. It also has some quality indicators, which I actually found it helpful in my setting, because at least for me, I can take a look and then counsel the results based on it. But it also has an option of giving the patient report. So it doesn't have these technical numbers or the quality indicator or anything like that. It just has this paragraph at the bottom explaining what their hearing loss is. But I'll have to say that it's not intuitive. So if you're, especially just general population that we see, especially for older adults who don't really have the understanding of what to look for in an audiogram, it's a little difficult to interpret. So just couple considerations. So for my study, we were using 6 years and older, and three different senior centers across the LA area, and then we actually included both English and Spanish speaking participant. As I said, it took about 5 to 10 minutes per participant, but we were also testing for multiple frequencies from 0.51 to 4, 6, and 8. I think another option will be you don't, because for epidemiological studies, I pretty much only use the speech frequency hearing loss unless I have some specific questions about the high frequency hearing loss. In that case, if you want to make the time shorter, you can always choose just the speech frequency hearing. For software, it was very easy to use. The participant had no issues with tapping yes or no. There were some false alarms, and it actually records it how many times. So basically, participant pressing yes or no when there was no tone. So it gives you a number for that one, and sometimes they actually miss the response. But generally, the interface itself was pretty intuitive. I wanted to compare that to Test, which is a pretty well, calibrated, well used application, mobile-based hearing screening application that's available. We used Test in the beginning, since while during the pilot stage, you're trying to, while we're waiting for the GSI AMTAS device to be shipped, we were trying to see what it's like to use the Test. We tried that one. For Test, what you have to do is that you actually have to keep the button while you're hearing the tone, and then go off of it when you stop hearing. And the older adults actually have a lot of trouble following that instruction. So I think HearX and Shoebox are probably similar to the AMTAS device. It's just tapping yes or no. But that's something that I learned during the pilot trial. For a headphone, again, it was pretty well tolerated. I did have one participant reported it was just too tight, so she was trying to raise the headphone while we were doing the testing. It turns out she actually had some unrelated injury to the ear, and probably that's why she was having a lot of pain. But other than that, we didn't really have a lot of issues with using headphone itself. For audiogram report, yeah, so there are different options that you can print. It also has an option of exporting the whole data as an XML file too. I also put a sample of what the noise report looks like. So on the second page of the audiology report view, it also gives you a summary of what the environment noise look like. I would have to say, since we were doing it at a senior center in a wherever available room, in the pilot stage in the beginning, we were testing right next to when the seniors were doing the bingo, and they were very loud and they're having a lot of fun. But that also captured a lot of false positive, probably hearing loss data at that time. But at least in this setting, I was able to explain kind of the whole purpose of the hearing screening, and then really the need, really what we're getting, pretty much the only thing we can tell you is whether you pass or fail. And then the recommendation is for them to get a diagnostic hearing test in a soundproof booth in a clinical setting. So this is my last slide. So I know it's great to kind of have this conversation about feasibility of incorporating these hearing measures in HearX or similar cohorts. But something short term we can do is that we can even think about updating questions or hearing loss and hearing aid use. That's something, hopefully feasible. But in long term, yeah, it'd be really great if we can incorporate some sort of a repeated objective hearing measures in HearX or similar cohorts, because we still have this question, how this complex association with the hearing loss, hearing aid use, or cognition, and a lot of questions still remained. Okay, yep, that's all I have.
Great, thank you, Janet. It was nice to hear about a different tool that we don't hear about as much as Shoebox and HearX. So that's great to hear your experience. I do have a question for I mean, I don't know who's going to know the answer, but it's really about, getting back to what Allison was saying about, having to carry so much equipment around if you are visiting people in their homes. Has anyone developed or is thinking about developing another app-based utility? So it might not be Mimi, but
Yeah.
is HearX or any other company thinking about moving to an app?
Yeah, so they all have Shoebox and HearX both have, just a standard computer-based could be used in like app style. And HearX as a team collaborated with the Hear Who, which uses something called digits and noise. And essentially it's doing literally presenting some digits to each ear in the presence of background noise. That's much easier to calibrate, actually. If you, for those of you who might remember this, the national hearing test with a landline phone used to call in, and it literally was like digits and noise test, and all AARP members had that accessible to them. So they've worked really hard to make audibility a major portion of that, and digits are low cognitive load. So the idea being that it can approximate hearing. So there are other tests that do that. It won't correlate exactly with pure tone audiometry, but I think we're at a stage where we really need some studies that are willing to do both so that we have those Rosetta Stones to start to understand everything. Um, I'll also just say there are like a dozen other apps now saying they measure hearing. We just know so little about them because it's coming fast and furious as we move forward in the digital era.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I've also add that, like Nick was saying, there's a lot of, apps that just coming and going these days. I think one difficult part about incorporating into research is how they calibrate to the specific headphone. Because in a everyday setting, if people are using different headphones, I think the Apple part of it is nice because most people use AirPods, so they have a calibration specific for the version of the AirPods that you're using. But the Android device gets a little tricky based on which headphone that you use. But that being said, for research studies, I think if you can just get a mobile phone and use the same headphone, that I think that shouldn't be a problem because the results from those applications are actually very accurate. I have patients coming in who test every day and then come with the results, and their results actually correlate pretty well with the results that we do in the clinical setting.
Yeah, just in terms of portability. Yeah,
Right.
I understand why having sort of a standard set of headphones is really useful. So yeah, my ideal world would be an app with headphones.
Yeah.
And then we would sort of get the best of both worlds in terms of, sort of standardizing as much as we can, but also having portability.
Yeah. I think HearX, maybe I know Nick can push HearX to make
I'll
this.
try.
So, I mean, what Mimi did was they took the 50 most common headphones in the world and like the 30 most common Android phones and platforms, and they did them in combos to create like their Android platform. And I think they actually also found out that the difference is a lot smaller than we thought it was, just because we've moved forward a lot with especially Bluetooth and low latency Bluetooth that makes it a lot easier. The more digital we get, the actual easier it is to calibrate and stay close. The issue was when, one group was using, gold-plated wire and one wasn't, and the signals were moving at different analog rates. So I think Janet, your point that you have people out there testing and it's pretty close to calibration, we're just getting really close to, I think, to a point where it matters a lot less.
Now I'm gonna ask a question. No one's gonna and then we'll get to Alice. Or is this to follow up on that, Allison?
No, go ahead.
Okay.
You go
So
first.
my question is like the one Nick doesn't want to hear. How few measurements can we get away with? So, clearly Ad Health selected 5. That was sort of related to hearing in middle age. Janet's like more clinically oriented. She's gonna pick more. And don't get me wrong, Ad Health at 3.5 minutes is like primo, but really to get at, we'll say hearing loss over age 50, what is the bare minimum?
I think Janet kind of said it, and I quit. I think it's 4.
Okay.
I think that again, the question matters.
Sure.
If you want to do repeats and you want to think about, I think ad health, uh, I didn't have to fight for it because Allison and Bob are like great people. They're easy to work with. And they were like, oh, yeah, you can add 8,000 hertz. But we wanted it because they came in saying it would be longitudinal. And we were like, 40-year-olds are not going to see movement on some of those lower frequencies. The only movement the most movement we're going to see is 8,000, which is why they have it. Whereas if you really just want like a one point in time or maybe every 5 years, the four frequencies is enough. And I I take such great offense, Jessica, to saying that I would be offended by the. I've advised one study just to do ask the better ear, because most people are really
Oh,
good
sure.
at better ear. And the truth is, there's two questions. You can ask them which is your better ear. If they're the same, they might not do it. But then ask them which ear do you put the phone up to,
Mm.
and they'll certainly know if they have one that they really prefer versus just whatever handed they are. And so that, because when we do the epi studies, underlining what Janet said, we usually just pick the better ear. And we say functionally, that's how you're doing in the real world with your hearing, most likely, because asymmetries are very rare, unilaterals are very rare. And that's all so you could literally do just one ear, four frequencies, which would be pretty rapid.
Yeah. I didn't mean to offend you, Nick. You do an
Oh,
amazing job
I'm just
straddling
kidding.
the ivory tower epidemiologist and the practical day-to-day considerations.
Everybody who's met me more than once knows I can't help but just be a ball buster forever.
Sorry, Allison, what was your question?
Yeah, so I wanted to ask it, kind of following up on something that Nick had mentioned earlier. Maybe Janet has thoughts about this too, but it's about, the ability to kind of harmonize data across studies in the future. And if you could kind of have your way with all existing studies, what would you like to see in terms of ability to harmonize? Would it be, the equipment and the PTA, the types of measurements, the range? Like, what are the things that you think are kind of most important as these studies start to integrate hearing and you'd want to see across them all the way?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I agree that I think if we can have just a bare minimum of the better hearing speech frequency as a continuous measure, I think that's all we need. And like what Nii was saying earlier, that device-to-device difference is very small at this point. We're really in this like digital world that all the devices actually work well. There's a reason why there's multiple devices because they actually all work very well. So you just have to kind of think about, what really kind of works for your setting. But if we can just get the continuous measure in one year, it'll be great. And for me, I mean, I have a lot of research questions about hearing aid use. So if we can have some sort of harmonized questionnaires for hearing aid use, actually, it'll be really great. Even, analyzing the NHATS data, they changed the hearing aid use questionnaire so many times over the past 20 years. So pulling that together to define regular hearing aid use was a little tricky. I mean, somehow the reviewers didn't really care about that part when I submitted that manuscript. But that could certainly be a question that come up if I talk to the audiologist or the clinicians. So I think something more simple about the hearing aids, but kind of touching up on both ever use and also the regular use will be great. And then for objective data, I mean, if you can, I don't know how, Nick, you think about it, even going down to 3 frequency could be an option. Because in the clinical setting, sometimes we just average 0.51 and 2 as a PTA. So if you really limit it, but I think adding that one frequency probably doesn't change the research protocol, research time that much. So if it can get those 4, I think that'll be a pretty reliable measure.
Yeah, I'll put a plug that the Sense Network and NIA are 34 that I'm on the steering committee with. The PIs are Josh Ehrlich, ophthalmology, University of Michigan, and Jen Deal, epidemiology, Johns Hopkins. And then the co-investigator team is just too many people to name. We have new harmonized data sets coming out and it really is based around we have an other category for how they measured hearing, but the main category is that 4 frequency pure tone average because it's the most common and it really is like the criterion standard when we just think about what audibility means in many ways. There are lots of people who are going to argue lots of different things, but that's just the one. And I will say a lot of people will just back it up to the World Health Organization and say that's the way they defined it, and that makes it easy to have sort of this pillar. Yeah. And Dr. Purdy's chiming in. Yeah, agreed. Couldn't agree more. It was why it was so important for Ad Health to have 8K hertz. If we really want to think about change in middle age adult, anybody younger than 50, we have to have 8K. Even in LASI Dodd, we've pushed it in there just to look at the change and the shape and pattern of the hearing.
Great, thanks.
Any other burning questions? With that, I just want to give an extra special thanks to our speakers. It's been really, I love talking to the people who do the data collection and can report on that piece, because really the devil's in the details here, and we really learn a lot from your experience. So thank you for being willing to take time out today and share. We will be posting this on our website. Nick will follow up with you in case you want us to also link our network to your network website.
You are welcome. Yeah, you should link to the Sense Network.
Help people
I
find
think
you.
the NIA would appreciate that.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you again, everyone.
Thanks,
Have a good
everyone.
afternoon.